Another thing I'd like to talk about is corruption in Congress, and the health care bill really brings this up. I'm going to mention a couple of articles that were in the Hartford Courant just this last week. There's an article that talked about how the lobbyists in Washington have a great deal of effect on our lawmakers. There was one article written by Robert Pear from the New York Times that explained that more than a dozen people in the House of Representatives allowed lobbyists to just write their statement about the health care bill. That's ridiculous. Lobbyists should not be doing that. There was another article in the paper, and this is Tuesday, November 17th, and these are just a couple of examples of the corruption in Congress. Drug makers have spent $110 million lobbying Congress this year on the health care bill. And at the same time, they donated $24 million to congressional campaigns. We need to take the money out of politics. We need real campaign finance reform, which I talk about on my website. And we need our Congress people to work for us and not the big companies that spend all the money on lobbyists and contribute money to their campaign. That brings up another item that I'd like to talk about. That's term limits. I support term limits. I think 12 years in the Senate and 10 years in the House of Representatives is long enough. We may lose some good people with term limits, but I think it would help reform the system and get people in there who don't care more about getting reelected than they do about solving long-term problems. Another issue I'd like to talk about, and this also touches on the influence that lobbyists have, and that's TARP and the concept of businesses that are too big to fail. Again, go on my website, you can read about it. I'm getting a little short on time to cover everything I'd like to cover. But I will mention this. Chris Dodd has recently proposed an 1,100-page bill to reform regulations of banks. It does do some good things, but I think it falls far short. And where it falls short is it doesn't address the too big to fail issue. And that's the biggest problem. That's the biggest reason we are in the economic mess we're in right now, is big banks had enough influence in Congress to prevent regulations that would limit them from getting too big to fail and making all these risky investments that ended up costing us taxpayers $700 billion. So I don't understand how someone can write an 1,100-page bill and not address the single most important issue. You know, these gigantic banks like Lehman Brothers and so forth, I think they should be broken up into maybe 5 smaller banks. We can't have banks that are going to take down our economy if they fail. And the regulations that have been proposed in Congress don't even address it. If you go to my website, I have a lot of information about this, including discussions with experts about it and their recommendations and their criticism of Congress for not addressing this issue. Another thing I'd like to talk about, and in my mind, so far I've been talking about a lot of fiscal issues. We need sustainable fiscal policies, but we also need sustainable social policies. And we're facing another kind of crisis in the United States that none of our politicians talk about. And that's the decay of our cities and the people that are having problems that live in our cities. Politicians are afraid to talk about this. Connecticut in particular, as you probably know, face a big problem. We have one of the highest per capita income of any state in the country, but we have 3 of the 10 poorest cities in the United States. I've volunteered in the Hartford school system for 18 years. I've seen it. I see what families face in Hartford, for example, and in other urban areas, and the challenges that the kids face. And I think there's two big things that we need to address. We need to address our education system. We need charter schools. Again, I talk about this on my website. And we also need to reform the drug laws in the United States to take the violence and the crime out of our cities and stop imprisoning a huge percentage of the male population in our cities. My previous episode was actually about this, so I hope you get a chance. I hope you had a chance to see it. It will be on YouTube, so you can watch it there as well. I go into great detail about how I think we should reform our drug laws and why it's so critical for our cities. It's also critical for our economy. We have entire populations and generations of people in our cities that aren't getting decent education and aren't getting prepared for the job market. And we're going to need those people to revitalize our economy. We need an educated workforce, a skilled workforce in the 21st century. One other thing I'll talk about, and then I think I'm going to run out of time. Another topic that's near and dear to my heart is eminent domain. Many of you are familiar with the eminent domain abuse that went on in New London, in Connecticut, and in other cities. I do not believe that the government should have the power to take away private citizens' property to give to a private corporation. And I was very disappointed by the Supreme Court's ruling on this. And I was also disappointed that the Connecticut legislature failed to pass the kind of legislation that protects our citizens from this kind of abuse. Many other states in the United States have passed that kind of legislation. Connecticut hasn't. I would support a constitutional amendment to the U.S. Constitution that makes it a violation for municipalities or other government agencies to take away property from private citizens to give to a private corporation. I mean, eminent domain is necessary at times for public works, but not for the kind of things that went on in New London and elsewhere. That was a lot of talking. I'm sorry that I talked so long, but you might wonder, am I qualified to serve as a U.S. Senator? I've been teaching at Trinity College for 19 years. I've done a lot of committee work in the faculty government. I know how to educate people about an issue and to convince them of the solutions. We need people in government that will tell the truth about the problems and then present the possible solutions with sustainable, long-term effects in mind, and then work to build a coalition among people to get them implemented. I can do that. I have a lot of experience in education, in committee work, and in problem solving. I was a farmer. I'm a father. I've raised 4 kids. I'll tell you, you'll learn how to problem solve doing that. And I'm an engineer. I teach problem solving. So learn more about me. Go to my website and think about voting for me in 2010.